Welcome to another Ocean Ideas Talk, brought to you by ocean lovers.
I'm delighted that we have Dr. Vanessa Pirotta and Dr. Olaf Meynecke, who are going to share how researchers are deciphering whales' bodies and biology and share what this tells us about their health and well-being and how we can hear and support them. So, as I mentioned earlier to the session, Dr. Vanessa Pirotta is a passionate and experienced science communicator who loves making science accessible. Vanessa has represented Australia internationally as the national winner of a world-renowned science communication competition known as FameLab, where she placed second in the entire world. Look at her. Stop. No, keep going. And we have Dr. Olaf Meynecke, who developed advanced short and long-term tagging methods in marine environments, receiving several awards for his work, and is currently leading the Whales and Climate Program, an international research initiative on the impact of climate change on whales. And he is also CEO and co-founder of Humpbacks and High Rises, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to marine mammal research and protection. Please join me in welcoming Vanessa and Olaf. So, firstly, I would love to hear a bit more about what you do. Vanessa, you have been presenting this afternoon, presenting awards and telling us about your new book, but tell us about what you actually do. Like, what is your day-to-day, and what are the whales telling us, more importantly?
So thank you very much. I would say that a lot of what we do is not necessarily that glamorous. A lot of it is behind the desk, writing things, in trying to work out, as scientists, what knowledge there is that exists out in the world, particularly around whales, trying to see what kind of things we can solve, the questions. I don't think Dr. Olaf and I will have any idea of exactly what whales are saying, because I don't think anyone in the entire world knows that Jessica's saying, hello, Australia, or hello, Bondi Beach. I just don't know what they're doing. Yes, that was my whale interpretation.
I really want to do my I can speak whale, but I'm not going to. So what do we think? What is the understanding around different communities, around the scientific community, about what they're telling us at the moment?
I think first of all, we're all trying to desperately solve the answers to things that we don't necessarily know the answers to, and that's okay. In the science world, we go about answering small pieces of the puzzle to further our understanding, the collective knowledge, and that's a lot of what we do. We're adding to that body of knowledge. But in us humans, we want to kind of get there and go, oh, I know this now, and the next. But the journey for us to keep learning about whales and potentially what they're telling us about the ocean is something that we should, I would say, continue to enjoy learning about, and that we might not necessarily in our lifetime fully understand what it is that we were on the search or the hunt for, and that gives it a bit of mystery, which is kind of nice.
Thank you. Now, Olaf, tell us about your work. Tell us a bit more about what you do and, Humpbacks and High Rises, but tell us a bit about your work.
Yeah, so I work for a university, but we're completely philanthropic funded. So that means money comes in externally for a research program that started in 2018, and we're focused on the impacts of climate change. We use humpback whales as a species to study the impacts, and then hopefully our tools will be applicable to other species. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of changes happening as we speak, and those changes will continue, and whales are adapting, but we're a little bit slow to adapt. And so developing tools, in particular for policymakers, to ensure that we actually can protect whales in the future, which there's no guarantee at all, is one of the major tasks. And then, of course, as a marine biologist, you've got this thing, you're going to want to save something, right? So you set up an NGO. A lot of people do that in marine science, trust me. It's not a new thing. And it kind of got me to, experience citizen science firsthand and knowing, how to deal with setting up an organization, running volunteers, and how to make people work for free. Ooh, that's actually really hard. And even harder is to make them pay to work for anyway, so that's a different story. But that's what we kind of do. We're trying to get volunteers to do citizen science, basically doing monitoring of whales. And then we can actually feed this information, the data, into the whales and climate program that we're running. So it's sort of like a build-up, network, and both things kind of nicely work together.
All right, so Olaf, this room is warming, the world is warming, the climate is warming. How is this all affecting whales? We started touching on this last year, but tell us how climate change is affecting whales.
Well, firstly, it's annoying. It's really annoying for us, of course, but then from annoying, it goes to becoming a threat. And we've got indications of a number of populations of humpback whales who've actually really changed their behavior. And these are studies that have been published. They're like scientifically proven. We're talking about shifts in migration timing. We're talking about new feeding areas that sort of come up, and like changes in strategies of feeding. So we really are seeing adaptation around the globe. And of course, what we also see, in particular in the Northern Hemisphere, where things are quite different in terms of food supply, and obviously warming in the Arctic is a lot faster, is that we've got this problem, the animals cannot find enough food. And food is the key to survival, right? So we now know that the Hawaiian population declined by up to 7,000 humpback whales in just 10 years. And this is massive, So, the happy like sort of story that we always bring up and say, well, we saved humpback whales and they're a great sign of conservation. But now we're actually seeing, well, these guys are struggling. They will adapt. There's no question. They're smart animals and they're doing it right now. But the problem, of course, is, how will they adapt? How can we protect them better in the future? And then what are the other species going to do who are not as flexible as humpback whales?
And on that, so we've kind of flipped the idea. We've gone from killing whales, and not all whale populations around the world are recovering, like the East Coast population, for example. There are other whales in the world, like the North Atlantic right whale, southern right whale even here in Australian waters, but particularly the North Atlantic right whale is a great example overseas, where ship strike and fishing gear entanglement is literally limiting their recovery, right? So that's still happening to this day. But to further on what Olaf was saying, we now have, in some populations, whales numbers doing really well. And now the challenge for us as scientists is, how do we manage all these whales? This is a good thing we have lots of whales. How do they deal with the environment how hopefully the environment can meet their needs in terms of food? We've got now more whales, more human impacts, more potential interactions. So it's all this, lots of whales in some populations, and greater need for us as scientists to make sure that we try and mitigate some of our interactions that potentially we are likely to have. Like this year, we'll no doubt see, and you can let me know what you think about this, but it's annually that there is an entanglement of a whale in fishing gear like shark nets, especially in Queensland. I'm not picking on the Queensland person here, but at the certain time of year, and any gear, regardless, I mean, if it's shark nets or there is fishing gear entanglement is a threat to whales all around the world. How do we manage this?
How timely that you just said that. So literally the report came out of the shark control program in Queensland, I think today, and highest numbers of deadly catch since record. Obviously it changes every year. I just spoke to Channel 7 about it, and like this is the same debate going on, and yes, we're going to have entanglements. Those are single events, of course not affecting the population but the individual, and it's really something that it doesn't fit into our time. We cannot do this. We cannot go out there and just randomly kill animals in the ocean. Like, we know what's happening. So, it's heartbreaking for people like us who actually, been trying to do something about it for years. But entanglements are generally actually a problem, not so much, the sharkness for the population, that's bad for the individuals, but actual entanglements in fishing gear. It's a huge problem. I mean, I just come back from Mexico 3 weeks ago. We've been doing research there, and we had one sick whale, and then we had one whale dragging a fishing net. And like, what were the chances? And you've seen multiple animals with actual scarring tissue who've got or had that issue with nets. They're the ones that survived, and it's a massive issue in those regions where there is, lots of fishing happening. So.
So, Vanessa, last year you were telling us about SnotBot and about some of the science, some of the research that's going on to try and, I guess, capture the data but understand more. What is that telling us about the changes we're seeing?
What's really cool is that we can think of whales as a lot of different things. Not only are they the size of a bus, but these animals traverse great geographical areas, and they go from some of the areas that are hit mostly by climate change, like Antarctica. Fortunately, I'm an Antarctic Science Foundation ambassador, and so I flew over Antarctica only a few weeks ago, and seeing the ice and knowing that the whales go down there, it's really hits home, because it's to think that the whales have gone. It took 7 hours to get down there, 7 days by boat. It's awful, and how they know to come up here. And so a lot of the research that I continue to do is collecting information, health information, to learn more about their bodies, internal health, and looking at those changes over time. And so my point to your question is that we can use whales as indicators of telling us about what's going on in the environment that we can't necessarily see, and often before it happens. So where they turn up, where they feed, behaviourally, what they're doing. Some scientists I know right now have some fantastic technology on right whales, so tagging technology, which is basically using similar devices like technology in your iPhone, and that will show us where these animals move, and they talk to satellite in space. And so they've, for a full year, been able to monitor where right whales have gone, tagged from Western Australia, which is really cool. So that is showing us that over time, if we collect as much knowledge as we can see whale movements, where they're going, and couple that with other things like environmental factors to potentially show us what the whales are doing, where they might be hanging out and why. And like I said at the start, they might be showing us things that are happening in our blue backyard that we don't necessarily know about, which is super exciting.
Now, I'm going to come out to the audience for questions in just one moment, so get your questions ready for these experts. But I do want to ask this one. Hopefully it's not too contentious, but it's genuinely I don't know the answer. Last weekend, I was up on the Central Coast. I was queuing in a little seaside cafe, and there was a big sign saying, "We want Wales, not wind." Genuinely, I don't know the answer to this. I might presume an answer. Is it a question of wind power or whales, or can we have both? Tell us about the interactions between those two.
Excellent topic. Finally, we're going to have a heated debate, which we actually need in this really hot room, don't we? Well, it's something. Well, so if we think about what's happening in the US, the same thing is happening here. So it becomes a political, sort of dilemma, and it's not so much a science-focused discussion. And once it's being hijacked for political reasons, facts are really hard to get through. This is the problem with all other things that we have, right? So yes, you can still have whales and turbines. Can you have climate change and whales? Some species, maybe not. So there is obviously, strong debate happening. And here for New South Wales, to be fair, if you look at the areas that have been assigned for the wind farms, I don't actually think it's going to be viable. In particular, in some of the areas, there's a height restriction because there's also there's an Air Force. So there's a height restriction making it probably not viable to actually put those wind farms out there. And also they're in very deep water. So some of the ways to actually have them there would be floating platforms. You can't fix them to the structure, to the bottom. And that's going to be all very expensive. So I'm not sure. Victoria, definitely going ahead. There's no question. There is impacts from wind farms, absolutely no question. There's vibration from the actual operation, so that will create sound waves underwater. And then you've got the supply ships that need to actually maintain those wind farms. And they make noise. There's going to be some form of pollution as well. But of course, the animals can avoid the area, which they probably will do, or they get used to it. If we're talking to humpback whales, they're actually really good getting used to things that are not good for them. they get used to shark nets. They definitely learn. After a couple of years, they know exactly what a shark net is. It's just that the babies don't know and the calves don't know. And they also know the danger of a net, but sometimes they can't see it. So if they have a structure in the water that they've seen before, it's there, they come every year, they know exactly what it is. So I think that's, that direct risk is not that high. There is potential, of course, for harm, and it needs to be mitigated. I think generally, I don't like big projects, big companies doing big projects, and it's a problem, right? We cannot centralize energy. We should actually have another form of energy supply, but that's a different debate. But anyway, that's my sort of opinion on that.
And to add on that, I think the thing is, with no doubt, we need to do as much as we can to have a greener existence on Earth. But anytime there is any activity in the ocean, fortunately, there does require consultation with experts to make anything happen. So you can't necessarily just go into the ocean and, in Australia at least, and just make something happen. It needs to go through a number of different hurdles, which is a good thing because, for example, humpback whales are protected. All cetaceans, whales, dolphins and porpoises are protected in Australian waters. Many moons ago, I used to be an environmental assessment officer for the federal government. I got there. I won't even dare say the acronym. It's in Canberra, but it's for the Department of Environment back in the day. And so people would come to me with their ideas, proponents, and basically say, we want to do this in this part of Australia, and I would need to assess that for its impacts on animals. So having that understanding, that is definitely at play. And I think people need to also be aware of, if we do move to having anything in the ocean, there is that associated activity that goes with it, like the vessels that'll go to the physical platforms, that kind of thing, and the presence of them along the humpback highway. For my master's thesis, one of the components that I did was assessing and looking at the data of the desalination platform off Sydney here. So we were able to find that the whales are able to swim past that, which is a good thing. There was no entanglements there. But so these are all the things we as scientists will be thinking about, but also providing knowledge for proponents, the federal government, state governments to think about when going ahead with potential these activities to help assist with our ongoing battle with the climate.
I get the sense we could have a whole session next year on the precautionary principle, but I think I'd rather go to the audience. Questions for our experts here? There's a hand straight up from Marina. I am running over with the microphone now.
Yeah, hi. I actually just went to visit the Allen Key, the sea shepherd ship, say that 10 times fast, that is trying to stop the krill trawling, which is so unbelievably devastating, especially to whale. And they were saying that it's actually fished for things like your omega-3 supplements, your pet food, and feeding farmed salmon, so crazy stuff. But they also said it was totally legal, the krill trawling. Is that true, and is there any way to stop it?
I'll add to that. So I will point out that there is a group of scientists and experts that come into play every year in Hobart at CCMLR. I have my book here. I can't remember the acronym. CCMLR. Yes, and so they are there, scientists, experts, are in place to help make sure that the harvest of krill, which if you don't know what they are small little prawns, there's lots of them and whales will feed on them. Antarctic krill is a particular species that they're probably harvesting and that the whales eat. And that's in place each and every year to ensure that the take of that is essentially done in a sustainable way. Just as my personal opinion is I am concerned about the harvesting of any krill, just because if we've got climate change happening, we're reducing sea ice. Sea ice is very important for Antarctic krill. If we reduce the homes of Antarctic krill, we potentially reduce the homes for Antarctic krill, and that's whale food. So we've got this growing whale population. How do these animals ensure that they're able to meet the energy requirements to do what they have to do? Are they feeding? And this is why we're potentially documenting feeding in Australian waters as well. But yes, I think people being informed about the take of krill is something, but there are experts and Australia's leading scientists like Dr. Virginia Andrews-Goffs who are in Tasmania that are a part of this to try and ensure that the activity is done sustainably.
Well, so I just throw in a few words. So one of the issues is, of course, that you cannot manage such a large area. We've got very limited information about the ocean dynamics in the Antarctic waters. We can still not accurately predict what's going to actually happen with climate change, because this is a huge area and it has a lot of different influences. And so, it's quite hard to manage something so little understood and just go in there and extract. So I think that's generally not a good idea. And if you think about the life cycle of one of those little krill guys, 10 years, so there's a lot of complexity in there. That means if your climate conditions are changing in like a 5 or 10 year period, you'll actually have impacts on your krill population and so on. So I think it makes it a lot harder to manage this kind of resource, rather than like if you've got a fisheries next door, just a few kilometers offshore. It's a lot easier to understand what the kind of like conditions are and how they change.
And there's another question just here.
Thank you. We've heard that there's cuts to funding with CSIRO and also the Australian Antarctic Division with their science program, and just wanted your reflections on what that means for data collection.
I'll start. As a scientist, as a marine scientist in particular, cutting funding is incredibly difficult to ensure the longevity of research, particularly when we're looking at things over time. It also means it's harder for us as scientists because we have to manage how we acquire our funds to keep feeding ourselves. I'm not speaking on behalf of Olaf, but I have a family now. I've got 2 young calves. So that means that I need to make sure that their upbringing is stable, but I also need to manage being a scientist as well. So that ensures that a lot of what I do is focused on the things I'm really passionate about, but it's not always funded to the way I'd love to keep going and doing as much as I can in here for Australia. And when I was finishing my PhD, actually, one of the things I was suggested by some colleagues was to go overseas. You should go. We need to stay here in Australia. We need to fund particularly marine science here in Australia too, so we can ensure that we are and uphold some of the best protection that we do have. And it's really important for those young, did you see those young kids before? It was so exciting having photo with all those students there that were just so empowered. They're in year 10, and to know that I was able to give them advice to going forward to picking things that are exciting, but also being realistic. Like a lot of what we do, we have transferable skills, and as scientists, we do a lot of different things to enable we can do what we do. And purely, and I'm sure Olaf can back me up here, we're very passionate about what we do. And if we weren't, I'm sure we would probably go work for somewhere where there's loads of money because, hey, why not? We could get that Tesla.
Well, passion doesn't pay, but that's the case with any kind of creative jobs as well. So that's the same problem. But I think there is something to think about. Why investing into structures that have been built over decades, who are actually not necessarily the most effective structures to generate science that we need and knowledge that we need for the future. There is a bit of waste of resources. Of course, one could argue, well, it's a stable structure, and those organizations like CSIRO have been there for decades, and you can feed them with money and then something will come out. But the problem is that they have been very focused on applicable science. And I have to say, like, if we just do what the industry wants, how are we ever going to exceed our knowledge to something really new, something that really changes? So, that's sometimes a cut in funding can also be a good thing. Just want to be going the opposite way.
And I know I do support that as well, because you work really bloody hard to do other things and make a difference.
We've got time for one last question just here.
Hi, very interesting. And just you mentioned before that there are some tools that you know of that you are presenting to, like, for policy. Can you talk a bit about that or not?
Yes, the tools. So actually, I actually had exactly that discussion with one of the volunteers here earlier. So it's very important. So as a scientist, right, we're spending years, decades working on a particular problem. We find hopefully a solution for it. But then how do you actually, bring this to something that changes things? Because, your published paper is not going to be read by any politician, not even by a policymaker. So you have to develop a tool that is, visualization of what you've been doing, that is easy to apply, and where, it could be something like an interactive map. And then, but that's not all, because the policymaker is not just going to walk around and look at all those fancy tools that you have developed. They need someone to actually point them in that direction. Then they will have a look and they will like, oh yeah, this is actually, I understand that. I can actually understand this is how we should protect whales in the future. And then they sit maybe on the table with the policymaker or the politicians, and then someone will hopefully, push that agenda forward. But we're going against people who've got a lot of money, and their agenda is usually the first one to be pointed out, whereas, the scientists, we don't actually have the time to develop these tools. There's no resources. So, I'm in that really difficult situation where I need to transform the research that we've been doing into these tools, and then also talking to the policymakers, which is what I tried last week in Portugal at a conference, and it was a challenge. These big guys from the UN and IUCN, they're mostly talking about themselves, and I was like, guys, I also have something to say, but that's the challenge. But we need these tools to actually reach the policymakers and then do the next step, and then hopefully implement it into legislation.
Now, we need to wrap this session up. I guess one last question is whether either of you can recommend any books about whales that you know of?
I don't know any good books, honestly.
Ouch. Vanessa?
That's because it hasn't come out yet, Olaf.
Oh, there's a book?
Yes, proudly, I have a brand new book, which is an annual resource about why whales do what they do. It's called The Humpback Highway. It comes out on the 1st of April. So there's books being sold and signed just out there. But if you really, in all seriousness, if you would like to learn more about some of the ways in which we learn about whales, some of the research that I've been fortunate to do, and some of the research that others do. It features a lot, actually. The Humpback Highway is a great resource, and before the whales start turning up, which will be off here in Sydney in just a few weeks.
Would you join me in thanking Dr. Vanessa Pirotta and Dr. Olaf Meynecke?
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Ocean Ideas. Please make sure to share it with your networks and help us in our mission to turn ripples of action into waves of change for our blue planet.